Hey everyone, welcome to GTM Secrets. I'm Stephen Lowisz. Talk about everything from sales and marketing to data, RevOps, you name it. Probably had someone on talking about it. Today's interesting because I have a venture capitalist on the phone. And I was just talking to him for a minute before. Shane, I'll let you introduce yourself here in a second. But I think founders, startups, we look at VCs as purple unicorns. What goes through their head? How do you even get a hold of them? Why would they want to talk to you, etc.? So Shane, I'm really excited, but
Sure.
give us a little bit of
Punch Capital is
background
the
on
fund
yourself,
I
man.
run. We invest in first and second gen immigrants building in the US. So software founders primarily, B2B. I mean, it could fall outside that scope, but that's the 80-20. We've invested in 15 companies, 7 of which have secured follow-on capital from the likes of Union Square Ventures, Insight Partners. There may be a company that's on the verge of a preemptive Series B. So we're young, right? And in essence, still figuring out what exactly our X factor is. But I will say, it's born partly, right, our thematic focus is born partly out of the personal background, having lived in Germany for a decade and now on the island of Mallorca. As you can see behind me, that's the Mediterranean. Been here 4 years. So our ethos, I mean, our mission, which resonates strongly with our founder base, is opening doors that had been closed to us due to bureaucracy or people not feeling comfortable connecting as far as capital and clientele. So before this, I, as mentioned, was in Germany. I was actually playing within the remnants of, I was quarterbacking on it was called GFL, German Football League. That was going back even further. I graduated from Brown University, having grown up in New England, went to New York and worked for Merrill Lynch, but during the financial recession, had no other options. So I traveled and got this offer to quarterback because they need skill position folks. They've got lots of foot-eye coordination, and you'd say in German, which means life experience, basically writing my own next chapter. Eventually got into Fortune 500 consulting with clients like Bosch, the bank, and Procter & Gamble, and so forth. And a little over 5 years ago, segued into venture capital. There was a fund not affiliated with Brown University, but friendly with them called Alumni Ventures. And it was great timing. They were conceiving their first fund, and that allowed me the chance to learn by doing. The apprenticeship model is often how you get going in VC, and haven't looked back.
I love it. First of all, are we talking about
Yes,
American football in Germany?
Yeah, it's hardly
I didn't know
a thing.
that was
It's
a
little
thing,
bit of
but
a
that's
cult
awesome.
following. But as mentioned, I was just keen on broadening my horizons and operating at the fringes, which is, I guess, how I see the commonality now in venture clearly, and that gets me going as far as the founders we back. One company, sort of skipping ahead, but Crew AI I've mentioned, it seems to be doing pretty well. We invested in their pre-seed. They're in the AI agent space, and 3 days back, Jensen Huang, if I'm pronouncing properly, over at NVIDIA announced a partnership. And yeah, that gets my juices flowing as far as just pioneering, innovating, ideally, just doing something out there at the edges of society.
That's awesome. How did you start? And I guess the better question would be even, why did you start Punch Capital in the first place? I mean, VCs are a dime a dozen. If you have money, it's easy to become an LP of almost any VC. Maybe overgeneralizing. I'm not the VC here, but why?
Sure.
Why and how did you start?
It's a great question. Why did I start? I think it was just a natural outpouring of my super connector abilities. Having, as mentioned, lived abroad and lacked on that front personally. I wasn't the recipient thereof. I got that chip on my shoulder and realized I had a little bit of a talent as far as like the synapses firing and connecting the dots toward how others might be helpful to others. And that's table stakes in venture, but at least it got me in the door. As mentioned, as a fellow pro bono for Alumni Ventures, I just knew I needed something fresh. And Germany was more a means to an end. And I worked tirelessly, right? That was my side hustle, but I was pretty conscientious as far as that was concerned and intentionally built the relationships. I didn't have deal flow at first, sort of develops organically over time. You develop, you build your credibility. And yeah, it was just the next natural step, having worked for various funds. So beyond Alumni Ventures, I was also a venture partner at certain places, a scout, just hustling, and eventually it was just time to launch my own fund. So here we are.
Are you on your
Precisely.
first fund
Yeah.
within Punch Capital? Got it. So correct me if I'm wrong. You focus primarily on
Entirely. Yeah.
very early
Pre-seed, maybe
stage
seed.
startups, correct? So, I mean, I had a VC take a chance on me, and they work with people in the ideation phase, which boggles my mind. We were actually late stage for my VC because we had a product. How do you assess opportunities when everyone has this magical, wonderful idea in their head? They all want to execute something, and they don't have a track record as a pre-seed company, like zero.
Yeah.
So
It's a
how do you
great
assess
question.
that?
I'm not sure I've found it out myself entirely. And perhaps it's a lot of luck. And it's not always direct. Like success isn't necessarily a direct outcome of work you put into diligencing founders per se. I mean, just getting access to them in the first place is the first bar you need to surpass. And to that effect, it's nice to have folks in our corner who refer us into interesting deals. Just going back to Crew AI, I'd written a small LP check myself into an upstart fund who's backed by Sendana, which means nothing to the audience, I'm sure, but Sendana is a prominent fund of funds. And this particular general partner, his name's Amit at Earl Grey Capital. They've got a pretty impressive track record as a fund one themselves, but Amit was a founder who sold his company for $150 million to HubSpot and had previously worked with Crew AI's founder. And yeah, I mean, so relationships pay off. I would say that's a filter. It's not nefarious or anything or ill-intended, but if your inbox is inundated with deal flow, how can you veritably assess the prospects of any particular company? So, being able to lean on your network does help in that regard.
So, okay, I hear you. And I have definitely heard that VC is word of mouth because you trust somebody. Funny enough, Startup Ignition, who invested in me, I went through a web contact form thinking I would never hear from them. And a few months later, they actually invested. I think that's an anomaly. You mentioned that it's actually hard to find the deal flow in the first place. That kind of boggles my mind because every founder I've ever met in my life wants funding and they're reaching out, etc. So I guess it clarified that. Why is it hard to
Sure,
find
sure. No, it's not.
entrepreneurs that want your money?
It's there's a signal effect somewhere in there. Wherein is it buyer's remorse? No, that's not it either. It'll come to me. But it's like when you're in the taxi and your driver's telling you to buy a certain stock. By that point, it's probably the point to sell, by the time the word has reached him and therefore you. So it's just like the dating game, I suppose. Like, why is there any merit to getting into hot rounds where they're quote unquote playing Tetris? I was actually just joking with a teammate yesterday that perhaps our fund too should be renamed the Tetris Fund, because that's an expression in the most promising instances thus far in our limited experience. The companies that we fought to get into and that were just trying to squeeze us in have performed the highest. Yeah. So, and just to be clear, we actually do, my principal Vish, who likewise has lived and worked in 3 countries, speaks 4 languages, had a modest exit. We've been together for the past 4 years in varying extents within the venture ecosystem. He leverages technology to conduct a great degree of outbound. And these tools are used likewise by tier 1 funds out there. So, you have to hustle, you have to stay busy, and perhaps something catches your eye. Always staying hungry. Trying to keep fresh.
Why the spin? So every VC tends to specialize in something or other, unless you're Anderson Horowitz maybe, or YC. Your niche is specifically immigrant founders.
Perhaps,
Why?
and to be frank, we need to identify something perhaps even more specific and be able to sell to LPs, and truthfully so, authentically, that we have an edge and it's repeatable, and that founders will A, find us, and B, pick us over the rest in hotly contested rounds or just all together, right, to come in on strong footing. So immigrants, it's twofold, right? Like one, the personal aspect, which I've touched upon, and the other being the stats back it up. I mean, let's not kid around. The proof is in the pudding. You look, it's 44% of unicorns in the U.S. have an immigrant on their founding team, or at least as a key leader. Yeah, I want to say
I
about
didn't know that.
50% of the Fortune 500 as well, 75% of the Forbes AI 50, a preponderance of like a high proportion of masters and PhD students as well. The grit, and if you're not a doctor, lawyer, or engineer, you'll put your parents to shame if you don't succeed as a startup founder. And also, you look, what they're doing is bringing learnings. They're uniquely privy to insights abroad, culturally and commercially, that they're now applying to the States and that no one else can see. They're not consensus-based thinkers.
I will say, as a family of immigrants, I do think that immigrants get down and dirty more than almost anybody. My family's Eastern Polish. They work harder than almost anybody. So I can understand why the leaning towards that. That being said, so you mentioned Crew AI is one of your investments, right? So you're doing something right. If they just signed a deal with NVIDIA, you obviously like the agent space in that case. I assume you're predominantly focused on B2B
You
SaaS.
could be,
Am I in the right ballpark? So within B2B SaaS, let's say, what specifically are you looking for? I imagine part of it's competency within the founders. I imagine part of it is, yes, a good idea, but the agent space is also overwhelmingly crowded or getting there. It's early, but they're getting funded left and right. They haven't proven necessarily a competitive advantage because at the pre-seed round, even if they have a product, they don't have product market fit 9 times out of 10. How do you start to even, how do you juggle all of that and say, okay, I'm going to take a bet with, my money and my LP's money on this deal?
As well, just hoping that it will work out and operating with conviction. That said, of course, we want to conduct diligence, we want to make sound investments and so forth, but we do place bets, essentially. There's no hiding that, right? If there are 40 portfolio companies, maybe 3 need to be Xers for us to be a well-performing fund, directionally speaking, right? So, AI agents is a space that is now becoming quite to say the least.
Competitive.
So, we're keen as well. We're dipping our toes into SLMs instead of just small language models, like more vertically driven, very specific, So I like exited founders as well. That reassures me a bit that they know how to operate and they'll be quicker this next time around. That said, to balance that out, maybe they're not as hungry because they've already proven themselves, and why bother to shoot for the moon?
I gotcha. So again, the agent space is getting crowded and it's a brand new space. I mean, Salesforce is now Agentforce, essentially. That makes sense. Now, if I'm a founder, like it took me 7 months to raise a pre-seed round. If I'm a founder and I want to go get funding, take Punch Capital out of it, how do I even start networking and getting in front of not entrepreneurs, but VCs in the first place?
I think founders don't necessarily always appreciate a VC's presence. And I can, at the very least, respect that. In my past, I was also, just a quick nod to this, a Techstars All-Star Mentor, just a nice designation for the 1 or 5% most productive and so forth. So I do have that innate empathy. And I mean, just in general, you don't want to listen to VCs. Later on in the process, if they reject you or pass, they give some nonsensical reason, right? So don't buy into that. And in the first place, maybe just approach other founders because they're going to understand the struggles more so than some white guy with a vest. By the way, Stephen, looking good today. Yeah. Yeah. And ideally, if you can be chased, because there is this notion of optionality. Like, why would an investor fundamentally bother to deploy into a company if they know they can wait another week? Yeah. So part of that is maybe I'm just noticing this, like nowadays founders don't put the deck in the initial email. They might not even send it after the call. They're kind of playing a little bit like playing up the mystique element. So not necessarily
That's
seeking their
interesting.
VCs as true partners. By the way, I say every time we have an approach of being unobtrusive yet active. We do want to help when called upon. In the monthly newsletter section, the asks there will ad hoc respond, and sometimes it's meaningful, but we also recognize it's not our company. Granted, we're writing smaller checks of anywhere between K to 200. We don't command a board seat, so yeah, I mean, I could give advice all day on how a startup could succeed, but until I've founded and sold a company, I'm far less credible.
How involved are you with your portfolio companies? Because you have like the Anderson Horowitz, who to my understanding is going to be like, here's money, F off, tell me when we cash out. Startup Ignition, they're mentors. They're amazing to work with. I love them to death. But VCs have a bad rep. So how involved are you as a mentor or advisor or whatever the case
Sure.
might be with your
I would say I
portcos?
do have I index toward being very hands off, but I also want to somehow authentically indicate that I'm there and even sort of prompt them to tap into me when needed, right? So just as a very recent example, yesterday, Joao, the founder of Crew AI, I've gotten in touch with Matt McGill, our mutual friend, who's astounding former SAP. He reported directly to the CMO as the global head of digital marketing.
He's been incredibly helpful, and
Nice.
actually I have a
Yeah.
call with
Yeah.
him in
Likewise. Incredibly
about
helpful.
an hour.
Hasn't asked for a thing, by the way. We happened to co-invest alongside Kleiner Perkins into a Y Combinator company. In fact, that founder with whom he had worked, right, going back to the networks, he had worked with this particular founder who had a $200 million exit, right? So again, you just take your chances. So anyways, he tapped into his network, and we're sourcing, we're collecting a bunch of resumes and interest as far as a product marketing manager that the Crew AI founder is keen on hiring. So that's one way. I also connected to a semiconductor company in Europe that's generating $13 billion in revenue. Not to overstate it, but just recently, a clever fellow over there mentioned he's testing out Crew AI's product. He's got the free trial, so it's nice to have been resourceful. We've also, on occasion, again, not to overpromise and underdeliver or anything like that, but we've successfully sourced founding machine learning engineers. We've brought co-investors alongside us into rounds. And I would like to be more helpful. And I will say, lastly, I was in Madrid with a unicorn founder, JC Glancy, founder of Zen Business, which he said is conservatively well over $100 million in yearly revenue. Yeah. Great guy. And he's spun up his second company now. And I had him on the podcast and on Punchcast, our own. And he was with a late stage investor, and we were all having beers together. I'm like, hey, why are you bothering to mingle with this investor? He goes, actually, it was refreshing because he would ask me thought provoking questions and in a non-judgmental fashion help me figure out my own direction. And I think the podcast is that is an extension of that. I've realized if I can bring folks on, make them feel comfortable and sort of challenge themselves, that could at the very least be flattering, if not fruitful, as far as deal flow and LP checks and so forth.
Makes sense. Out of curiosity, going back to the immigrant conversation, are you the
No,
family of an
I'm not.
immigrant? Do you mind if I ask?
I've invested predominantly
Okay.
into immigrant founders and advised them alongside the likes of 18Z and so on and so forth. However, it's not obvious clearly from the optics, but I consider myself now a twice over immigrant, having again lived in Germany, tried overcoming the culture.
That's fair.
Again, not to speak disparagingly, it was of my own volition that I remained, but I took that head on, and definitely the empathy. The empathy is I've got a high degree of that toward immigrants in the States.
So switching gears a little bit, I know we're jumping all over, so bear with me, but there's a lot of buzz around what's going to happen in 2025. Interest rates have gone down. Hopefully capital starts to flow a little bit more than it has the last couple of years. What's your outlook in the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
I haven't even thought 3 years ahead, I'll admit. I've been so immersed in just building the fund, but we've overcome, we were just getting our story straight, getting everything in gear. We've just begun having conversations around capital formation, right? And so my mind is a little bit more tuned to this, and I am, I'd say, decidedly optimistic, given I don't generally like to talk about politics at all, but it's, objectively speaking, the fact, what's the term even called, but the future president's board of technology board, they're A players. And yeah, I think we've already seen the foreign direct investment from, can't pronounce the guy's name, but the SoftBank CEO.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about.
I forget his name. Overall, extremely optimistic, and that could very well help Punch get more capital in its coffers and be able to throw its weight around by supporting more startups. Now, I'd say I'm quite optimistic, not informed, but that's my fairly strong conviction.
I think that, again, politics aside, almost everybody is feeling a little more optimistic, right, whether you love or hate Trump. I think he's a business guy at the end of the day.
But, yes, a business guy entirely. Sure.
I don't even think conservatives, and frankly, I am one, which I don't typically talk politics. I don't even think conservatives like his personality. Just throwing that out there, but fair enough. So I think that VCs, like I said at the beginning, are often looked at as like the purple squirrel, and they're not even looked at as human by entrepreneurs that need that magical funding. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Let's humanize. These are people who worked hard for their money, and now they're trying to take chances on entrepreneurs. And yeah, some of it is capitalism. Some of it is probably altruism, right? Hey, I want to help other people succeed. Just tell me about you. What drives you? What has shaped your philosophy in your career on how you approach these things, like early stage versus late stage, immigrants versus white guys invest, to your point. Just tell me a little bit about yourself. Sure. And kind of your philosophy and what shaped it.
Cutting to the chase a little bit as far as the immigrant angle. Listen, I'll admit, again, it's business. It's an angle. And I'm an upstart VC, I'd like to claim, an emerging manager, if you will. I state very humbly. And as I've understood, you have to carve out a niche and then go from there. So to somehow specialize. We've also thought about, given I have worked specifically for an Ivy League oriented fund in some regard, a really bright fellow told me, a fellow investor, that folks like the intersection of existing business models, like the Uber times Stripe or immigrants times Ivy Plus. You do the Pareto math on it. We're just targeting those universities because, I don't know, we show the statistics that many unicorns come out of those campuses. Yeah, so as you can see, we're very much in the deliberation stage nonetheless. And it's what I possess very authentically, having, again, lived abroad. I can count, as an example, on one hand, how many, maybe 6 or 7 times, was I ever introduced to other folks in Germany. And maybe that experience wasn't altogether unique. Even among Germans, perhaps they function that way, I'll never know. But I lived in the city of Stuttgart for a while, which is where the headquarters of Porsche, Daimler, which is Mercedes-Benz, and Bosch are, as an example, and developed 2 friendships the entire time. One of whom, one of my friends, none of whom were from Stuttgart, and one was a Turkish entrepreneurial lady herself. So, yeah, that's deep-seated. And I definitely there's a bit of an edge, a bad taste I have left in my mouth, and I really do enjoy connecting people to each other. So for whatever reason, that seems to be a valuable skill within VC.
That says a lot, because you do come off like a master networker, man. I mean, we got introduced by somebody in both of our networks, Matt McGill, like you said. So to make two friends in that amount of time seems like
Well, I'll give a brief
a
example
very
if I may.
odd statement.
There's a founder in New York who's doing $1 billion in yearly revenue. And we actually connected at his immigrant gala, believe it or not. And so there's been that relationship has taken on its own life very positively. But there was a woman she's part of one of Europe's wealthiest families or something like that. She was moving from London to New York. And I told him, hey, she's good people's. The two of you should connect just for a lunch, whatever, no agenda. And lo and behold, upon meeting, he relayed to me that they actually discovered she just moved into his very building. And he said with a 10 of 10 introduction and so on and so forth. You can imagine that might result in something somehow. So yeah, that's the kind of work I like to do, having not had that myself.
So two questions just to kind of round this out. And again, I want to focus on humanizing VCs. We're all people. We all put our pants on the same way. But again, I don't think founders look at VCs as that. They look at them as the gatekeepers to their future success, and it's a numbers game. Two things. One, if you weren't in VC,
really question that.
What would you be doing?
Yeah, I'm not competent enough to be a founder. I've seen it countless times where emerging VCs who've exited their own companies as software founders they return back to their that's where they feel most comfortable and most productive. So what is a VC after all? It's I hope to find meaning in it. I've gone so far as to pray for my portfolio companies, which I should do more often. Well, I mean, right, because that's about
awesome.
As much as I can do, admittedly. I don't want to get in the way. What else would I do? Perhaps leverage that ability to, like, I've noticed that, hey, I don't know. So I'd better succeed at Punch Capital. That much is becoming abundantly clear. Yeah.
Fair enough. What is a book or a quote? First, I'll start with that you think every entrepreneur should read.
Okay, a book an entrepreneur should. I really like Naval's Almanac, which is a compilation of tweets and some transcribed material of his podcast appearances and so forth. Really sharp guy. Naval Ravikant, if I'm not mistaken, is a billionaire entrepreneur out in the Bay Area, founded a company, now invests very heavily as an angel, and lots of wisdom distilled as far as how to make money, actually, is kind of he admits very well that it's just a game. But if you want to play the game, then don't hate on it and kind of learn the rules. I'd say Shoe Dog is a close second by the founder. Yeah, it is.
Shoe Dog's pretty good. Talk about scrappy, to say the least. What is a book, or I'll even go as far as to say a book or movie, even quote, that has that really resonated with you, whether it shaped your philosophy or whatever. What's one of your favorite books, quotes, or movies?
I do want to see Gladiator 2 with Denzel. And as far as motivational material, we probably all come across his YouTube clips, graduation appearances and whatnot. If not, do so. There's not one single quote, but a guy who is he has the gift of gab is a guy, Myron Golden. I've just become acquainted with him. And if you type in his name on YouTube, you'll find some excellent material as far as how to, I guess, become successful, but in a way that's enjoyable and meaningful to mankind.
I think you have more interesting responses than the typical how to win friends and influence people and whatnot. Not that it's a bad book, but it's usually the cliche.
And by the way,
response,
Stephen, I encourage you to maybe write a book. I've thought about doing that myself. I've got a CEO coach who encouraged. I'm always doling out quotes, but she said, "Shane, you've lived an interesting enough life yourself with a roller coaster, but never mind that. Once I've got 50 or 100 guests, maybe put that in compact form." So, encouraging you as well.
I would like to. It's on my bucket list of things to do. I got to say, I'm a little jam-packed with Identity Matrix, but it's definitely on my bucket list. And I've had some unique ups and downs. When I was young, I got into a ton of debt. I was making a ton of money for being so young. Didn't know how to manage it. Got sued by Amex, moved to Central America to rebuild the business. I've got some
Well,
interesting stories, but time is
sure,
an
sure.
issue, as I'm sure you can relate to. Shane, any last kind of thoughts, comments, words of wisdom for the founders and entrepreneurs watching? Anything that they
I would
should,
just
like, if they
say
take
go
away
out, go
one
and
thing,
grow.
what would
That's
it
my
be?
motto for the year. Just I encourage them to pursue, to ideally succeed,
I
to
like
fail in the process, but to pick themselves up by the bootstraps. And they're more than welcome to reach out to me if they see any value in that. They can find me, as you know, on LinkedIn, Punch Capital. That's the way to go.
What's Punch
Punchcap.com.
Capital's website? Punchcap.com. Got it. Well, don't go obliterate Shane's inbox. I don't encourage that, but reach out to Shane. Great guy. Not the first time that we've had a chat. I'm glad Matt made the intro,
Loved it.
but Shane, I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Cool.